a stormy night, a frightened child, and a wounded German shepherd who refuses to give up. When Officer Ethan Cole's daughter faces danger alone, the dog he once rescued becomes the family's last hope. Through blood courage and unspoken faith, their bond is tested in ways no one could imagine. But what happened after the storm changed everything forever. Snow was falling over Ridgefield, Colorado, covering the small town in a soft white silence. The streetlights glowed faintly through the storm, and the world felt still like the night was holding its breath. Officer Ethan Cole stepped out of his old truck and pulled his coat tighter against the cold. Beside him, his 10-year-old daughter Emma held his hand. Her eyes were pale blue, but clouded, unable to see the world around her. She moved slowly, using the rhythm of her father's steps as her guide. Inside the Ridgefield Animal Rescue Center, the air was warmer but filled with the mixed smells of hay soap and wet fur. The sound of barking echoed through the hallway. Dozens of dogs called out from behind metal cages, each one hoping for a hand, a voice, or a chance. Ethan nodded to the woman waiting by the front desk. She wore a green vest with the words Ridgefield Shelter stitched on the front. Her hair was silver, tied neatly into a ponytail, and her smile carried the calm patience of someone who had spent her life caring for lost souls. "Evening, Officer Cole," she said kindly. "You must be Emma. I'm Sally Moore. We've been expecting you." Emma smiled, turning her face toward the sound. "Hi, Miss Sally." "You've got a sweet voice," Sally said. "Come on then, let's meet some friends who are waiting for a home." They walked down the long corridor together. On both sides, cages lined the walls, golden retrievers wagging their tails, a nervous hound pressing its nose against the bars, a small spaniel trying to stand on its hind legs for attention. Sally told short stories as they passed. "That one's named Milo. He loves belly rubs. The beagle there was found near the highway. Poor thing wouldn't stop following cars until someone rescued him." Emma listened closely, tilting her head at each bark or shuffle. "That one sounds happy," she said softly. Sally laughed. "You've got good ears, sweetheart. He is happy. Dogs know when someone kind is near." Ethan watched as his daughter reached out carefully toward one of the cages. The dog inside pressed its wet nose against her small fingers, tail wagging like a heartbeat. For a moment, Ethan saw something he hadn't seen in a long time, her smile open and bright. It reminded him of the days before the accident, before darkness took her sight and laughter from their home. He swallowed hard and forced a small smile of his own. They kept walking until the noise began to fade. The last few cages were quiet, their occupants older, tired, or shy. Emma stopped walking. Her white cane tapped once on the concrete floor. "It's quiet here," she said softly. "Is this one empty?" Sally hesitated. Her expression changed, the warmth in her face turning gentle but sad. "No, honey. It's not empty. That's cage 12. Ethan followed her gaze. At the far end of the hall, under a flickering light, lay a large German shepherd. His coat was a mix of black and sable brown, his tail still, his body curled tight against the wall. He didn't bark or lift his head. Only his ears twitched when he heard them approach. Emma took a small step forward. "What's wrong with him?" Sally's voice dropped. "His name is Shadow. He used to be a police K-9. Served 5 years on the force in Nebraska. One of the best, they said. But..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He lost his partner, Officer Tom Avery, during a raid. Since that night, he hasn't barked once." Ethan frowned. "You mean no one's adopted him?" Sally shook her head. "People tried. He won't eat unless it's dark, won't go outside. He doesn't attack, but he doesn't trust either. He's quiet in a way that breaks your heart." Emma stood still, listening to the silence behind the bars. She tilted her head, hearing only the faint sound of breathing from inside. "So, he's been waiting," she whispered. "Every night," Sally said softly. "He lies there facing the door like he's expecting someone who'll never come back." Ethan exhaled the weight of those words pressing on him. The story sounded too close, too familiar. He had lost someone too, and in a way he had never come back either. After a long pause, Emma spoke again. "Maybe he's waiting for someone different." Sally looked at her, surprised. "That's a kind thought, sweetheart. But he's been through a lot." Emma smiled faintly. "That's why he needs someone like me." Her father blinked, unsure what to say. "Emma." She turned her face toward his voice. "Daddy, all the other dogs barked when I walked by, but he didn't. It's not because he's mean. It's because he's tired like you used to be." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. Sally crouched beside the cage, speaking gently through the bars. He was trained in Omaha, smart, brave, loyal. But after the incident, he stopped responding to commands. They tried retraining new handlers, everything. Nothing worked. So they retired him early and sent him here. Emma listened, her fingers brushing the air as if trying to feel the story itself. "Does he have any visitors?" "None," Sally admitted. "You're the first person to ask about him in months." Emma's lips curved into a small smile. "Shadow," she whispered, tasting the name like it meant something sacred. Sally noticed the change. First, the slight movement of Shadow's ears, the way his head lifted, just a little at the sound of the girl's voice. It was barely there, but enough to make Sally freeze. "He heard you," she murmured. Emma took another careful step closer, stopping just before the bars. "Hi, Shadow," she said softly. "It's okay. You don't have to be afraid." Ethan instinctively reached out, wanting to pull her back, but Sally raised a hand. "Wait." For a moment, nothing happened. The air felt thick, every sound in the shelter fading away. Then slowly the dog moved. His paws scraped lightly against the floor. He rose to his feet, stiff, hesitant, but alive. Emma extended her hand toward the cage palm, open steady. The cold air brushed her fingertips. From the shadows, the German Shepherd took one cautious step forward, then another. His breath fogged in the space between them. He stopped just inches away, his amber eyes locked on her hand. "You don't have to come if you don't want to," Emma whispered. A long, fragile silence passed. Then Shadow pressed his nose gently against her fingers. Emma gasped softly, startled by the warmth of his breath. The dog stayed there, unmoving, his chest rising and falling against the bars. And then, almost like a sigh, he licked her hand once, hesitant, unsure, but real. Sally covered her mouth, eyes glistening. "He hasn't done that with anyone since he came here," she whispered. Ethan knelt beside his daughter, his throat tight. He couldn't explain what he was seeing. It felt like watching a door open inside all of them. Emma smiled, tears trembling in her blind eyes. "See, Daddy, he's not broken. He just needed someone to listen." Shadow stayed close to the bars, tail moving weakly, like a heartbeat returning after a long sleep. Ethan looked from the dog to his daughter and finally understood. Some souls don't need words to speak, they just need to be heard. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and endless, as if heaven itself had leaned down to watch. The snow had stopped falling by the time they reached the front of the shelter. The sky above Ridgefield was still gray, and the air smelled like cold metal and pine. Inside the building was quiet, except for the hum of the heater and the soft jingling of keys in Sally Moore's hands. Emma Cole stood by the counter, her white cane resting against the wall. Her small hands were folded in front of her, but her voice was calm and sure. "Miss Sally," she said, "I want to take Shadow home." Sally hesitated. She glanced at Officer Ethan Cole, who stood a few steps behind his daughter, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "Emma," he said softly. "He's not an easy dog. You heard what Miss Sally said. He's been through a lot." "I know," Emma replied. "That's why I want him. He needs someone to believe in him again." Ethan rubbed his neck, unsure what to say. His mind told him no, that a traumatized canine wasn't the right match for a blind child. But his heart? His heart saw the quiet glow in her face, the small spark that had been missing since the accident. Sally placed the keys on the desk and leaned against it. "Well," she said with a small smile, "we do allow trial adoptions, 30 days, to see if it's a good fit." Ethan looked at her, then back at Emma. 30 days? "Yes," Sally nodded. "If it doesn't work out, you can bring him back. But something tells me," she glanced toward the hallway, "you won't have to." Emma's face lit up. "Thank you," she whispered. "Let's get the paperwork started," Sally said warmly. She motioned to the corner where a man was sorting supplies. "Eddie, could you help me bring Shadow out?" Eddie Torres, a shelter volunteer in his 30s with kind eyes and a scruffy beard, nodded. "Sure thing." While Sally filled out forms, Ethan watched his daughter sit patiently humming under her breath. It was a tune he recognized, one her mother used to sing while cooking dinner. For the first time in years, the sound didn't hurt. When the door opened again, Shadow appeared. The big German shepherd moved slowly beside Eddie, tail low paws, soundless against the floor. He wore a plain brown collar, and his coat gleamed faintly under the light. Emma turned her head toward the sound of his steps. "Shadow," she called gently. The dog froze. Then, at the sound of her voice, his ears lifted slightly. "He remembers you," Sally said softly. "That's a good sign." Eddie handed the leash to Ethan, who hesitated before taking it. Shadow's amber eyes flicked up once, then down again, nervous but alert. Ethan knelt, holding the leash loosely. "Hey there, boy," he said quietly. "You're coming with us, okay?" The dog didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. Emma reached forward her hand, searching until it found the top of Shadow's head. Her fingers moved slowly through his fur. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're going home." Sally smiled at the sight. "I'll get you a copy of the file," she said. "Feeding schedule, vet notes, that sort of thing. Oh, and a collar tag, we can make one before you go." Ethan signed the final line of the adoption paper. His signature looked heavier than he meant it to, but when he saw Emma's face, that quiet, hopeful smile, he felt something loosen in his chest. Outside, the world was white and still. Snow crunched under their boots as they walked toward the truck. Emma held Shadow's leash in one hand, her cane in the other. Shadow walked close beside her, careful with each step as if already learning her rhythm. At the door, Ethan opened the back seat and spread out a blanket. "Up you go," he said. Shadow paused, staring at the truck like it was another test. Then Emma spoke softly. "Come on, Shadow. It's safe." He jumped in. Ethan couldn't help a quiet laugh. "Guess he listens to you better than to me." Emma grinned. "Maybe he knows I can't see him, so he has to trust me first." They both got in. The heater roared to life, filling the truck with warm air and the faint smell of old leather. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of tires rolling over snow became the only rhythm. Halfway down the road, Emma reached her hand toward the back seat. "Can I touch him again?" "Sure," Ethan said. Her fingers brushed against soft fur. Shadow shifted slightly, then pressed his head against her palm. She smiled. "He feels sad, Daddy, but also gentle." Ethan's voice softened. "That's a good way to put it." They passed quiet houses, their windows glowing orange against the snow. The town looked peaceful, almost holy in the fading light. Ethan thought about the story Sally had told, how Shadow had refused to leave his fallen partner's side. The image stayed with him. A dog refusing to give up even when everything was lost. He felt a strange kinship with that pain. When they reached home, Ethan parked in the driveway and stepped out first. The cold hit him like a wave. He helped Emma down carefully, then opened the back door for Shadow. The dog jumped down and landed silently in the snow. He stood still, sniffing the airtail, motionless. The house loomed before them, small 2 stories with light glowing through the curtains. Ethan looked at him. "This is it, buddy," he said. "New start." Shadow's ears twitched, but he stayed quiet. Always quiet. Emma held the leash firmly and smiled up at her father. "He'll like it here," she said with certainty. "I can feel it." Ethan nodded, though part of him wasn't sure who she was trying to comfort, the dog or him. Sally Moore stood at the shelter window, watching through the falling snow as the truck disappeared down the road. Her breath fogged against the glass. The faint glow of the parking lights reflected on her face. Beside her, Eddie folded the empty leash hook back into place. "Think they'll make it?" he asked. Sally didn't look away. Sometimes, she said quietly, "Heaven sends broken angels to find each other." Eddie nodded slowly. "Then maybe they'll all heal." Sally turned off the lights, leaving the hallway in soft shadows. The dogs that remained settled into silence, as if the air itself had changed. Outside, the snow fell again, calm, gentle, endless. Back on the road, Ethan glanced at his daughter. She had fallen asleep against the seat, her hand still resting near the back where Shadow lay. The dog's breathing was steady now, slow and peaceful, as if the long years of waiting were finally over. Ethan's gaze drifted to the mirror. He saw the child he'd almost lost, and behind her the dog who had already lost everything. He whispered into the quiet cab, "Guess we're all starting over, huh?" No answer came, but something in the stillness felt like agreement. The headlights stretched down the empty road, carving a path through the white. Ethan's chest felt lighter, though he didn't know why. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the cold and the years of silence, a door had opened. The first crack of something holy returning. He didn't know it yet, but that night when Shadow left the shelter, a miracle had already begun. The house felt different that evening. For years it had been filled with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every step sound too loud. But tonight, there was a new sound. The soft click of paws on the wooden floor. The faint rattle of a leash being set down near the door. The quiet breath of a dog, trying to understand his new home. Ethan Cole hung his coat by the door and glanced back at the living room. The fireplace gave off a dim orange glow, enough to paint soft light across the walls. Shadow stood near the entrance, tail-low eyes scanning every corner. He didn't bark or move much. His body was still, but his gaze never stopped searching. Emma sat cross-legged on the rug, her white cane resting beside her. "He's quiet," she said, listening carefully. Ethan smiled faintly. "He's just checking things out. Give him time." She tilted her head. "He doesn't sound afraid. Just lost." Ethan looked at the dog again. "Maybe both," he said softly. Shadow walked to the window and stared at his reflection in the glass. Outside, the wind howled across the snowy yard. The sound made him tense. His ears twitched, his tail stiffened. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not loud, but deep, full of warning. Ethan frowned. "It's okay, boy. Just the wind." But Shadow didn't move. He growled again, staring at the reflection of his own eyes, those amber eyes that once saw the world through duty and command. Now, they only saw a stranger. Emma rose slowly. "Can I go to him?" Ethan hesitated. Maybe let him settle. but she was already moving, careful and sure, her bare feet brushing the floor. She used her hand to find the wall, then followed the sound of Shadow's breathing until she reached the door. The wind outside grew louder, shaking the glass. Shadow stiffened again, muscles tight, ready to defend. Emma knelt down beside him. "Hey," she whispered gently. "It's just the window. You're safe now." Her hand moved through the air until it found the top of his head. For a moment he flinched, not out of anger, but confusion. Then slowly, he relaxed. His body eased against the floor. His breathing softened. Ethan stood a few steps away, watching quietly. He hadn't seen Emma like this in years, calm, certain, alive. Shadow's eyes half closed. His chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm. Emma smiled, feeling the warmth beneath her palm. "See?" she said softly. "Nothing to be scared of." The dog let out a low sigh, a sound almost human, full of tiredness. He laid his head on his paws. Ethan felt something tighten in his throat. For so long the house had been filled with echoes, the clink of his badge on the table, the creak of floorboards, the ghost of his wife's laughter in the kitchen. But now the silence wasn't empty anymore. It had a heartbeat. He crouched beside his daughter. "You should sleep soon," he said quietly. "I'm not tired," she replied, her fingers still moving through Shadow's fur. "He's still awake." "Yeah," Ethan murmured, glancing at the dog. "Maybe he's keeping watch." Emma smiled. "Then I'll stay with him." Ethan started to argue, but stopped when he saw her face, peaceful, glowing in the firelight. He nodded. "All right. Just a little while." He stood by the doorway, watching them both. The snow outside pressed against the windows, turning the world white. Inside, warmth slowly crept back into the corners of the house. Shadow didn't sleep, but he no longer trembled. His breathing steadied. Every few minutes he would glance at the girl beside him, the child who could not see him, but seemed to understand him better than anyone ever had. Emma leaned her head against the wall, whispering stories to him. Small things about her school, about her mother's favorite songs, about how she used to dream of walking through fields of snow without being afraid of falling. Ethan sat at the table, listening from a distance. Her voice was soft, almost like a prayer. He remembered the months after the accident, the sound of hospital machines, the cold touch of doctors' words. They had said his daughter would never see again. He had held her hand through the tears, pretending to be strong. But the truth was, he had gone blind in another way. Blind with guilt, blind to hope. And now here she was, comforting someone else's pain. When the fire dimmed, Ethan stood and covered her with a blanket. She had fallen asleep beside Shadow, her hands still resting on his neck. The dog didn't move, didn't even lift his head. His breathing matched hers, slow, steady, safe. Ethan watched them for a long time. The sight was almost unreal. He whispered, "Thank you," though he wasn't sure who he was thanking, God, fate, or the broken dog lying beside his daughter. Outside, the storm softened. The branches stopped knocking against the windows. The wind turned into a gentle hum, like a lullaby for a tired world. Ethan walked to the window and looked out at the snow-covered street. The reflection of the room shimmered faintly in the glass. For a moment he saw three shapes, a man, a child, and a dog, gathered around a small circle of light. He didn't feel so alone anymore. Turning off the last lamp, he whispered, "Good night, Shadow," then went upstairs. From the doorway of her room, he looked back one more time. Emma and Shadow slept near the fire side by side. The old clock ticked softly in the background. For years the house had been quiet because of sorrow. But tonight, for the first time, it was quiet because of peace. And somewhere deep inside, in the place where his heart had been locked away, Ethan felt something stir. It was small, fragile, but it was real. Hope. Morning came quietly to Ridgefield. The snow outside the window sparkled like tiny stars, and the house smelled faintly of coffee and pine. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole didn't wake to silence. He woke to movement. From downstairs came the soft sound of footsteps and a faint rustling of sheet music. Curious, he followed the sound into the living room. Emma was sitting at the old piano. It stood near the window, covered in dust until now. The piano had once belonged to her mother, Claire. After the accident, no one had touched it again. Its keys had stayed silent like a closed heart. But now, under Emma's small hands, it began to live again. The first notes were unsure, trembling like a voice learning to speak after years of quiet. Then slowly the melody grew clearer, soft, careful, but full of feeling. Shadow lay at her feet, head resting on her shoes. His eyes were half closed, his ears twitching to every sound. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, not wanting to interrupt. The tune filled the room like warm light spilling through broken clouds. When Emma finished, she smiled faintly. "Did it sound okay, Daddy?" He cleared his throat. It sounded beautiful. She turned her face toward him. "It was Mom's song, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, she used to play it every Sunday morning." "I remember," Emma whispered. "I used to dance around while she played. Shadow seems to like it too." At the sound of his name, the dog lifted his head slightly, tail brushing the floor. Ethan smiled. "Guess we all do." Later that morning, the smell of something sweet filled the air. Ethan looked out the window and saw a familiar figure walking up their snowy path. Mrs. Nora Green, their elderly neighbor. She was short and sturdy, her white hair tucked under a knitted hat, and she carried a basket covered with a cloth. "Morning, Officer Cole," she said cheerfully when he opened the door. "Heard you've got a new family member." Ethan chuckled. "Word travels fast in this town." "Always does," Nora said, stepping inside. "Now, where's this brave fellow?" Emma's voice called from the living room. "Over here, Mrs. Green." Nora smiled at the sound and followed it. When she saw the big German shepherd lying calmly near the piano, her eyes softened. "Oh my," she whispered. "He's beautiful." Shadow raised his head, sniffing the air. Nora moved slowly, holding out her hand. "Hello, boy," she said gently. "You look like you've been through a war." Ethan laughed quietly. "You're not wrong." "Poor thing," Nora murmured. "Well, I brought cinnamon rolls for you all. Fresh from the oven." Emma clapped her hands. "Thank you. They smell amazing." Nora placed the basket on the table. "Your mama used to bake these, didn't she?" "Yes," Emma said softly. "But mine never turn out right. They always taste like too much flour." Nora chuckled. "Then you'll just have to eat mine until you learn." Shadow sniffed at the air again, tail wagging once. Nora bent to pet him carefully. "Don't worry, handsome. You can have a piece later." From that day on, Nora became a regular visitor. She would stop by with pies, cookies, or soup, always saying she had made too much for one old lady. But everyone knew she came for company. She had lost her husband years ago, and her grown children lived far away. Now she found comfort in the warmth of the Cole house, in the laughter of a child, the steady breath of a dog, and the slow healing of a man who had carried too much guilt. In the evenings, Ethan would work on his police reports at the table, while Nora knitted by the fire. Emma would sit at the piano, playing softly, and Shadow would lie across the rug, his eyes following every move she made. Sometimes when the wind blew hard outside, Nora would tell stories about her husband's garden, about the time she got lost in a snowstorm and was guided home by a stray dog. "Dogs remember love, not walls," she said one night, sipping tea. "That's why they always find their way back to it." Emma smiled. "Then Shadow will always find us." "I think he already has," Nora replied. The weeks passed and Shadow began to change. He no longer startled at every noise. When the floor creaked or the phone rang, his ears would twitch, but he stayed calm. He followed Emma from room to room, always at her side. If she dropped something, he would nudge it back toward her with his nose. Ethan watched in quiet amazement. Each evening, as Emma practiced, Shadow lay beside her. The sound of the piano seemed to soothe him, and maybe in a way, it soothed Ethan too. The music wasn't perfect. Sometimes Emma hit the wrong key or lost her rhythm, but she never stopped trying. And whenever she laughed at her mistakes, Shadow's tail thumped softly against the floor like applause. One Sunday morning, Ethan brewed coffee while listening to the two of them. The melody drifted through the air, mixing with the smell of cinnamon and fresh bread. He realized something then. The house didn't sound empty anymore. It sounded alive. After breakfast, he joined them in the living room. Nora was sitting in her usual chair, knitting a scarf the color of the sky. Emma was teaching Shadow to respond to simple words: sit, stay, come. Shadow listened carefully, his head tilting with each command. When she said, "Good boy," his tail wagged eagerly. Ethan chuckled. He's a fast learner. Nora smiled. Love's the best teacher. The day passed in warmth and laughter. As the sun set behind the snowy trees, the last notes of Emma's piano filled the room like a prayer. Shadow lay curled beside her, his eyes closing slowly, his body completely at peace. Ethan stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold. His daughter, his neighbor, and the dog that had somehow brought life back into their home. He thought of Claire, and for once the memory didn't hurt. It felt gentle, like the final note of a song that doesn't end. It just fades into quiet. Outside, the sky turned a deep blue. Inside, warmth glowed from the windows, spilling onto the snow. In the soft light and faint smell of cinnamon, winter no longer felt cold. It felt like healing. The rain came late that night, soft at first, then steady against the windows. The house was quiet. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, her head resting on a pillow, one hand still touching Shadow's fur. The dog lay curled beside her chest, rising and falling in slow, peaceful rhythm. Ethan Cole stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching them. The sight always did something to him, a strange mix of peace and pain. He turned off the lamp and walked into the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping the glass like small, steady fingers. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee, though it was far too late for one. The warmth gave him something to hold on to. He sat down at the table, elbows on the wood, and listened to the storm. The sound pulled him backward to a night he could never forget. The rain had been louder then, the road darker. Claire's laughter had filled the car light and full just before the turn. Emma had been in the back seat, humming to the radio. Then came the blinding headlights, the wet skid, the sound of metal screaming against the guardrail. And then silence. He remembered reaching out, the smell of gasoline, the taste of blood in his mouth. He remembered Claire's hand slipping from his, her eyes closing, her voice breaking off mid-word. He had lived every second of that night again and again, each time trying to change it, to brake earlier, to turn faster, to take the hit himself. But no matter how he replayed it, the ending was always the same. Claire was gone. He stared into his coffee, seeing nothing but her reflection in the dark liquid. "I should have saved you," he whispered to no one. Shadow shifted in the other room, a small sound that brought Ethan back. He rubbed his face and tried to steady his breathing. The phone rang. The sharp tone cut through the rain. Ethan picked it up quickly. "Cole here." A familiar voice answered, calm but tired. "Evening, partner. It's Deputy Carl Dawson." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Carl. Been a while." "Yeah," Carl said. "Listen, I wouldn't call this late unless it mattered. We've had a string of break-ins around town, small stuff at first, But tonight, someone hit the hardware store near Main Street. Ethan frowned. That's 3 blocks from the station? Exactly. Security footage is useless. Rain messed up the cameras. Thought I'd ask if you've noticed anything strange on your side of town. Ethan looked out the window. The only movement was the rain sliding down the glass. Nothing here. Just quiet. Good. Still keep your doors locked, Carl said. This guy's not scared of bad weather or alarms. Got it, Ethan said. He hesitated, then added, How's the department holding up? Same as always? Carl sighed. Except we miss our best officer. Ethan gave a small, humorless laugh. Don't start. I mean it, Carl said firmly. You could have retired with honors, Ethan. You still could come back. Ethan looked at his hands, the same hands that had once held a badge, a gun, a steering wheel, and a promise he couldn't keep. Not yet, he said quietly. There was a pause. Then Carl softened his voice. How's Emma doing? She's better, Ethan said. He glanced toward the living room. She's found something good. The dog helps. Shadow, right? Yeah. Carl chuckled. Heard about him from Sally at the shelter. Said he's a tough one. Ethan smiled faintly. He's got a past. Guess we both do. Maybe that's why you understand each other, Carl said. When the call ended, Ethan set the phone down slowly. The rain had eased, falling in long, even waves. He stood up, walked to the doorway, and looked again at his daughter and the dog. Emma was sleeping soundly now, her face soft and peaceful. Shadow was still beside her, one paw stretched protectively toward her leg. The sight made Ethan's chest tighten again, but this time not from pain. He sat on the floor near them, close enough to hear Shadow's breathing. It was strange, he thought, how the dog seemed to sense things, the tension in the air, the sadness in the room. Shadow never barked or begged. He simply stayed like he had made a silent promise to guard the girl who couldn't see him. Ethan whispered, You're a good one, boy. Shadow's ears flicked slightly, but he didn't open his eyes. Ethan leaned back against the wall and let out a slow breath. The house was quiet again, except for the faint rhythm of rain on the roof and the sound of 2 steady heartbeats in the dark. He thought about what Carl had said, that he could still go back to the force. Maybe someday, but not yet. He wasn't ready to face the badge, the streets, the reminders. He was still learning to breathe again, just like the dog asleep beside his daughter. He looked at Shadow, the same creature who hadn't barked since losing his partner. Ethan knew what that kind of silence meant. It wasn't peace. It was guilt turned inward, the kind that wraps around your soul and won't let go. He took a deep breath and whispered, If faith had a shape, maybe it would look like you. Shadow stirred slightly, his tail moving once. Ethan smiled faintly. You and I, we both lost something we can't replace. But maybe she can teach us how to live again. The lights from the street lamp flickered through the curtains, landing softly on the floor. Ethan stayed there for a long time, listening to the small, steady sounds of life around him. The ticking clock, the sigh of the dog, the soft whisper of his daughter's breath. The echoes of guilt were still there deep inside him, but they didn't crush him anymore. Outside, the rain began to fade. Inside, something in him finally began to quiet too. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt like a place waiting for morning. The night was calm. The snow had stopped falling hours ago, leaving the world covered in a soft white glow. The air outside was cold and clean, and the moon hung low above the quiet street. Inside the house, the fireplace burned gently. Ethan Cole sat on the couch with a cup of tea, flipping through an old book he wasn't really reading. Across the room, Emma sat on the floor, brushing Shadow's fur. The German Shepherd lay still, eyes half closed, tail sweeping the rug slowly. Daddy, Emma said suddenly, Can we go outside? I want Shadow to feel the snow. Ethan looked up. Now it's freezing out there. She smiled, her clouded eyes turned toward the sound of his voice. Please. He's never played in the snow with me. He hesitated. The father in him wanted to say no, to keep her warm, to keep her safe. But then he saw how she held the dog's leash, how sure she looked. He sighed, setting down his cup. All right, he said softly, but only for a few minutes. Emma stood quickly, excitement lighting up her face. She slipped on her coat and boots while Ethan opened the front door. A rush of cold air swept in, carrying the faint scent of pine and snow. Shadow perked up ears, straight eyes alert. Go on, boy, Ethan said. Take care of her. Outside, the night was silver. The snow reflected the moonlight, making everything glow softly. Each step crunched beneath their boots. Emma held the leash in one hand and used her cane with the other, though Shadow stayed close enough that she hardly needed it. Wow, she whispered. It sounds like the whole world is sleeping. Ethan smiled. Maybe it is. They walked slowly down the small path in front of the house. The snow was thin now, more like a blanket than a storm. Shadow sniffed the ground, his paws leaving neat prints beside Emma's smaller ones. Daddy, she said after a while, tilting her head toward the sound of Shadow's breathing. He's like my shadow. Ethan looked at them. The girl and the dog walking side by side, their steps in perfect rhythm. Her white cane tapped softly with each move, and Shadow matched her pace like he'd been born for it. He felt something stir inside him, a quiet awe that made his chest ache. The scene looked almost holy under the moonlight. A blind child and a broken dog finding their way through the snow together. Yeah, he said quietly. He really is. Emma stopped walking for a moment. She took a deep breath and lifted her face toward the sky. It's cold, she said, smiling. But it feels bright. Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see him. That's the moon, he said softly. It's shining right on you. She turned toward his voice. Does it look big? Big and silver, he said, like a coin hanging in the sky. She laughed, a soft, clear sound that drifted through the quiet air. Shadow wagged his tail, then sneezed when a snowflake landed on his nose. Emma giggled harder. He doesn't like that, she said. Ethan chuckled. No one likes cold noses. They kept walking a little longer. The streetlights glowed faintly, and the world felt gentle, like time had slowed down just for them. Shadow led Emma carefully over the uneven path, his steps sure and patient. Every now and then, he'd pause and look back at Ethan, as if to check that the man was still there. I'm right here, boy, Ethan said quietly. When they reached the edge of the yard, Emma knelt down and scooped a handful of snow. She held it out toward Shadow. Here, she said. You can touch it. He sniffed it first, then licked it once, making her laugh again. What does it feel like? Ethan asked, watching her. Cold, she said. But soft, like it wants to disappear. He nodded. That's a good way to say it. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the faint crunch of snow beneath their feet and the slow rhythm of their breaths. The night felt alive, not loud or bright, but full of something peaceful, something real. Finally, Ethan said, Time to go in, before we all turn into snowmen. Emma stood brushing her gloves together. Okay, but can I hold his leash this time without my cane? Ethan hesitated again. Are you sure? She smiled. I trust him. He watched as she tucked her cane under her arm and gripped the leash instead. Shadow stood tall beside her, his tail wagging slowly, his body steady as stone. All right, Ethan said quietly. Go ahead. Together they walked back toward the porch. Emma's steps were careful at first, then more confident as Shadow guided her. She didn't stumble once. When they reached the door, she turned her face up to her father. When I walk with him, she said softly, I don't feel blind. Ethan swallowed hard, the words hitting deeper than he expected. He looked down at her, then at Shadow, who stood calmly, snow dusting his fur like white stars. "Maybe that's what trust looks like," he said. Emma smiled, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Then, I think I'm learning it." They went inside, shaking off the snow. The warmth of the house wrapped around them like a blanket. Ethan hung their coats by the fire while Emma sat down on the rug. Shadow circled twice before lying beside her, his head resting gently on her knee. Ethan watched them for a long moment. The glow from the fireplace flickered across their faces, painting the room in gold. He thought about how far they'd come from a dark shelter to this small, quiet home where laughter lived again. Outside, the moon climbed higher. Inside, Shadow sighed contently, and Emma leaned against him, humming one of her mother's songs. Ethan poured himself another cup of tea, but didn't drink it. He just stood there listening. The night was still. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't the silence of grief, it was the silence of peace. The night was quiet, so quiet that even the snow seemed to breathe. A thin layer of white covered the yard, glowing softly under the pale winter moon. Inside the fireplace, whispered, filling the house with a gentle orange light, Ethan Cole sat at the table, finishing a report from work, while Emma sat cross-legged on the rug, brushing Shadow's fur. The big German shepherd lay still, tail-thumping once in a while, his eyes calm and warm. After a while, Emma looked up. "Daddy," she said softly, "can we go outside? I want Shadow to feel the snow." Ethan looked at the window. The glass was misted, the world outside silver and cold. "Sweetheart, it's late," he said, "and freezing." But just for a few minutes, Emma pleaded, her voice bright with hope. "He's never played in the snow before." Ethan sighed, but he could never say no when she smiled like that. "All right," he said finally. "Let's put on your coat." Emma grinned. She stood, her movements light and careful. Shadow rose too, stretching before following her to the door. Ethan helped her with her scarf and gloves, then opened the door. A wave of cold air slipped inside, sharp and clean. The smell of snow filled the hallway. "Stay close," Ethan said. "I will," Emma replied, holding Shadow's leash. They stepped outside. The snow crunched softly beneath their boots. The moonlight poured over the yard, turning it into a field of silver. For a moment, everything was still, no cars, no voices, no sound, but the soft breath of winter. Emma lifted her face toward the wind. "It's cold," she whispered, "but it feels beautiful." Shadow sniffed the air, his paws sinking lightly into the snow. His breath came out in white clouds. He walked beside Emma, careful and slow, never pulling the leash too far. Ethan followed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, watching. The sight in front of him made his heart ache in the best way. Under the moonlight, the little girl and the dog moved side by side, their steps perfectly matched, two lost souls finding their rhythm together. "Daddy," Emma said suddenly, turning toward his voice, "he's like my shadow." Ethan smiled. "He is," he said quietly. Emma giggled, the sound light and clear. Shadow wagged his tail at the sound, brushing snow off the ground. The laugh echoed softly through the yard, rising into the still air like music. They walked farther down the small path that circled the yard. The snow was thin now, glimmering under the light. Emma reached down once to touch it, her gloved fingers brushing the cold surface. "It feels soft," she said, "like it wants to disappear." "That's snow for you," Ethan said. "Beautiful, but gone too fast." She smiled. "Then we have to enjoy it while it's here." Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see him. "You're right about that." They stopped near the old oak tree at the end of the yard. Its branches were heavy with snow, bending under the moonlight. Shadow stood close to Emma, pressing his side against her leg, as if to remind her he was there. Ethan leaned on the porch rail watching them. For a moment, the whole scene looked like a painting, the blind girl, her hand resting on the head of the dog who once trusted no one, both standing in the glow of a soft winter moon. Something sacred lived in that silence. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched, letting the image carve itself into his memory. The girl he had feared would live in darkness had somehow found light, not with her eyes, but with her heart. After a while, Emma turned back toward the house. "Daddy," she said, "can I try walking without my cane?" Ethan hesitated. "Without it, you sure?" She nodded. "I'll hold Shadow's leash. I trust him." Shadow looked up at her ears forward, as if he understood. "Okay," Ethan said softly, "but go slow." Emma tucked her cane under her arm and took a careful step. Shadow matched her pace perfectly, his body steady beside her. When she turned, he turned. When she slowed, he stopped. Ethan followed quietly, heart pounding with both pride and fear. But Emma didn't stumble. Her movements were calm and sure, her face peaceful. When they reached the porch again, she smiled wide. "See," she said proudly. "He knows where I'm going." Ethan laughed softly. "Looks like he's better at directions than I am." She crouched down, running her hand through Shadow's fur. "When I walk with him," she said gently, "I don't feel blind." Ethan stood there for a long second, his breath caught in his throat. Then quietly he said, "Maybe that's what trust looks like." Emma tilted her head. "What does it look like?" He smiled faintly. "Like this, a girl and her dog walking together in the snow." She giggled again, and the sound felt like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. "Let's go inside before your fingers freeze," Ethan said. Emma nodded and followed him up the steps. Shadow stayed close, guiding her with careful steps. Inside, warmth wrapped around them like a soft blanket. The fireplace was still glowing. Ethan took off her coat, brushed the snow from Shadow's fur, and hung their scarves to dry. Emma sat down on the rug and held her hands near the fire. "It smells like wood and snow mixed together," she said dreamily. Ethan smiled. "That's winter." Shadow lay down beside her, pressing his head gently against her lap. Emma's hand found his ear, rubbing it slowly. Outside, the wind had gone quiet. The snow shimmered under the fading moonlight. Ethan sat down in his chair, watching them. The room was filled with a calm he hadn't felt in years. He thought about all the nights he had spent drowning in guilt, unable to sleep, afraid to hope. But tonight that weight felt lighter. Maybe it was the dog. Maybe it was the laughter. Maybe it was both. The fire cracked softly. Emma hummed a tune, one of her mother's old songs. Shadow lifted his head, listening, then let it rest again. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment and breathed. The night was quiet, but it was no longer empty. It was full of warmth, of trust, of life returning one small heartbeat at a time. The storm came without warning. By evening, the sky over Ridgefield had turned black. The wind screamed through the trees, bending them like they were made of paper. Rain hammered against the windows, and thunder rolled far across the valley. Ethan Cole tightened his coat as he walked toward his patrol car. He was working the night shift, one he couldn't avoid. Before leaving, he knelt beside his daughter. "I'll be back before morning," he said softly. "Lock the doors, keep the lights on. Shadow will stay with you." Emma nodded, one hand resting on the German shepherd's head. "We'll be fine, Daddy." Ethan smiled, kissed her forehead, and stood. Shadow followed him to the door, tail low, watching. "Take care of her," Ethan said quietly. Shadow gave a small huff, as if he understood. When the door closed, the house fell into a hush. Only the sound of rain and the low rumble of thunder filled the space. Emma sat on the couch, reading by touch the small book of raised dots her teacher had given her. Shadow lay near her feet, his ears twitching with every gust of wind. Outside, the rain grew harder, slashing against the windows. The branches of the old oak scraped the siding, and the wind howled through the chimney like a ghost's breath. Shadow lifted his head, listening. "Just the storm," Emma said softly, reaching down to stroke him. "It's okay." But his body stayed tense. His ears shifted toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen. Then somewhere under the roar of the storm came a new sound. A faint creak. The back door. Shadow stood instantly, muscles tight, a low growl deep in his chest. Emma froze. "What is it?" she whispered. He took a few slow steps toward the kitchen, nose hightail stiff. Lightning flashed outside, lighting the hallway for half a second. The shape of the door flickered slightly open. Shadow Emma's voice trembled. "Who's there?" The answer came in footsteps. Heavy, wet, uneven. A man stepped inside, soaked from head to toe, his face half hidden by a hood. In his right hand, a knife glinted under the lightning. His name was Earl Danner, a name Ethan hadn't said out loud in years. A former inmate, a man Ethan had once arrested for armed robbery. He had sworn revenge as they led him away. Now, he was here. "Pretty house," Earl muttered, his voice rough. "Didn't think I'd find it this easy." Shadow stepped forward, growl turning sharp and deep. Earl stopped smirking. "Oh, I remember you," he said. "The cop's dog, huh? Guess he left you to babysit." He took another step, knife in hand. "Move, mutt." But Shadow didn't move. He stood between Earl and the stairs, between the intruder and the sleeping child upstairs. His body was low ears, flat eyes locked on the man's every move. Earl's smile faded. "Fine," he hissed. "Have it your way." Then he lunged. The house exploded into chaos. The crash of boots, the snarl of teeth, the sharp clang of metal hitting tile. The knife clattered to the floor, kicked aside as Shadow leapt at the man's arm. Earl shouted, twisting, trying to pull free, but the dog's jaws locked tight. Blood spilled down his sleeve, mixing with rain and sweat. "Let go!" he screamed, slamming his elbow into Shadow's ribs. The dog yelped, but didn't release him. In the living room, Emma covered her ears, heart racing. "Shadow," she cried. The storm outside matched the violence inside. Thunder shook the windows, lightning lit the walls white, and rain poured down harder, drowning every sound except the growls and screams. Earl stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. He grabbed the fallen knife with his free hand and swung wildly. The blade sliced across Shadow's shoulder. The dog cried out, but surged forward again, teeth sinking deeper into the man's arm. Emma stumbled toward the sound, hands shaking. "Please stop," she shouted, tears blurring her blind eyes. "Stupid dog," Earl shouted. He kicked hard, catching Shadow in the side. The dog fell gasping, but even then he tried to stand. Earl grabbed the table for balance, blood dripping onto the floor. His breath came in ragged bursts. "I'm not here for you," he muttered, glaring at the stairs. "I'm here for him, your daddy." But before he could take a step, a low snarl filled the room again. Shadow was on his feet, blood darkening his fur, one leg trembling but his eyes burning with fury. He lunged. The two collided, hitting the ground hard. The knife slid across the floor again. Shadow bit down on Earl's forearm and didn't let go, no matter how hard the man screamed or punched. Lightning flashed once more. And in that white light, Emma could see the shape of her dog, fighting, protecting, refusing to give up. "Shadow," she cried. "Please come back." Earl shoved the dog off, finally crawling toward the back door. Shadow staggered, sides heaving. Blood dripped onto the floor. Emma dropped to her knees, crawling toward the sound of his panting. "Shadow, where are you?" He turned his head weakly, dragging himself closer. "I'm here," she whispered. Hands searching until they found his fur. It was warm, too warm. Outside, sirens began to wail faintly in the distance. Someone must have called the police after hearing the fight. Earl stumbled through the door, vanishing into the rain, leaving a trail of red behind him. Inside, the house fell silent again, except for the storm. Emma cradled Shadow's head in her lap. "No, no, don't do this," she whispered, tears falling freely now. "You did so good. You're safe now. Please stay." Shadow's breathing slowed. He opened his eyes, once meeting her blind ones, as if he could see right through the darkness. His nose brushed her wrist. Then, with a soft sound, he licked her trembling hand, once slow and gentle, before his head grew heavy against her arm. "Shadow," she whispered again, shaking him. "Please wake up." The sirens grew louder, red and blue lights flashing faintly through the rain. Ethan's car screeched into the driveway minutes later. He ran through the storm, kicking the door open, shouting his daughter's name. "Emma." She turned her tear-streaked face toward the sound. "Daddy." "He saved me." Ethan froze when he saw the scene, the overturned table, the blood, the small figure holding the broken dog in her lap. He dropped to his knees beside them. "Oh God, Shadow." Emma's voice broke. "He protected me, Daddy." He didn't stop. Ethan pressed his hand over the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Stay with me, boy. Please." Shadow didn't move. His chest rose once more, then stilled. Outside, the storm began to fade. Ethan held his daughter close, one arm around her, the other resting on the still body of the dog who had given everything. Rain fell softer now, as if the heavens themselves had run out of tears. And in that quiet, broken night, a father, a daughter, and a fallen guardian sat together. Their hearts shattered yet bound forever by love stronger than fear. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the streets of Ridgefield into rivers of mud and light. The storm had not eased. If anything, it had grown louder, wilder, like the whole sky was roaring. Ethan Cole gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The call had come through the radio just minutes ago, a break-in on the east side of town, the same area where he lived. He pressed harder on the gas. The wipers fought to keep the windshield clear, but the rain came too fast. Streetlights flickered past like flashes of lightning. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. "Unit 4 suspect possibly armed. Male mid-40s limping last seen near the old mill road." Ethan's stomach tightened. He knew that description. He had memorized it years ago, back when Earl Danner had stood in front of him in court, spitting threats through broken teeth. He turned onto Mill Road, tires skidding on the slick pavement. The headlights cut through the curtain of rain. For a moment he saw nothing but water and fog. Then through the blur, he saw him. A figure stumbling along the roadside, drenched, limping, dragging something behind him. Ethan slammed the brakes. The car slid a few feet before stopping. He threw open the door and stepped into the storm, his boots splashing into cold puddles. "Danner," he shouted, his voice cutting through the thunder. The man turned slightly, eyes flashing in the light. Even through the rain, Ethan saw the blood on his sleeve. "Well, look who it is," Earl Danner called out, his voice rough and mocking. "The hero cop." Ethan's heart pounded. "Where is she?" he shouted. "What did you do?" Danner laughed, a cruel, broken sound. "Relax, officer. Your little girl's alive. That mud of yours, though." He spat into the rain. "He's not so lucky." The words hit Ethan like a knife. Something inside him snapped. He ran forward. Danner turned and started running, slipping across the wet road, his limp slowing him, but not stopping him. Ethan chased him through the storm, through mud, water, and darkness. Thunder cracked overhead as they reached the back road near the woods. Lightning lit the path for just a second, enough to show the man's shadow ahead. "Stop, Danner," Ethan shouted again. "You're done." Danner stumbled, falling to one knee before pushing himself up. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," he yelled. Ethan didn't answer. The sound of his own heartbeat drowned out everything else. The rain mixed with sweat on his face as he lunged forward, tackling Danner into the mud. They hit the ground hard. Danner swung wildly, catching Ethan across the jaw, but Ethan barely felt it. Years of pain, guilt, and rage poured out all at once. "You hurt my family," he growled, his voice shaking. "You came into my home." Danner tried to reach for something, maybe a knife, but Ethan pinned his arm down, twisting it behind his back. The old metal cuffs on his belt gleamed under the rain. The same pair he had used the day he arrested Danner the first time. With one swift motion, he snapped them around the man's wrists. The click echoed louder than thunder. Danner spat mud and water. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "You think that dog of yours died for something?" Ethan's breath came hard, his hands trembling. He wanted to hit him again, to make him pay for every scar, every tear. But he didn't. He forced himself to stand, gripping Danner by the collar. "Get up," he said coldly. "You're going back where you belong." Blue and red lights flashed in the distance. The sound of sirens grew closer, cutting through the rain. A police cruiser slid to a stop nearby. Deputy Carl Dawson jumped out his flashlight, cutting through the storm. "Ethan," he called. "You okay?" Ethan nodded, pulling Danner to his feet. "He's all yours." Carl moved quickly, taking hold of the prisoner. "Good catch," he said, but when he looked at Ethan's face, his smile faded. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine," Ethan said. "Where's the ambulance?" "My house." Carl blinked. "Your house?" Before Ethan could answer, the radio in Carl's car crackled. "Dispatch to all units, possible injuries at Officer Cole's residence. Repeat, possible injuries at Officer Cole's residence." For a moment, the world stopped. Ethan's heart froze in his chest. He felt the blood drain from his face. "Say that again," he whispered. "Multiple injuries reported. Unknown condition of child. Requesting immediate medical response." He didn't wait to hear more. He shoved past Carl, sprinting back to his car. "Ethan, wait," Carl shouted. "We'll handle it," but Ethan was already gone. Boots pounding against the wet ground, the storm blurring everything around him. He jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine. The tires spun on the slick road before catching traction. The car shot forward, water spraying from the sides. His hands shook as he grabbed the radio. "This is Officer Cole. I'm en route to that address, my address." No one answered fast enough. The only response was static and the sound of rain beating against the roof. He sped through the town lights, flashing horn, blaring. Every turn felt too slow, every second too long. The image of Emma's face filled his mind, her laugh, her small hands on the piano keys, her voice calling for him. "Please," he whispered to no one. "Please be okay." The storm roared louder as he turned onto his street. Lightning lit up the road ahead, a pale ribbon leading straight home. For a brief second, he saw the glow of flashing lights through the rain, red, blue, white, reflecting off the puddles. He pressed harder on the gas. The radio crackled again. Units already on scene. Medical team responding. But Ethan wasn't listening. His whole world had narrowed to one thing: getting home. Behind him, the storm raged on, the wail of sirens mixed with the pounding of rain, fading as he sped away. He didn't care about the prisoner, the cuffs, the bruises, or the pain in his jaw. All he could think was one word, one name echoing over and over in his chest. Emma. And as the rain swallowed the sound of his engine, the lights of his patrol car disappeared into the night, leaving only the storm behind, roaring like a wounded heart. The house stood in silence when Ethan Cole burst through the front door. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain and fear. Lightning no longer flashed, yet the memory of thunder still echoed in his ears. The living room was a wrecked furniture, overturned shards of glass on the floor, and dark stains that made his stomach twist. His boots splashed through small puddles from the rain that had blown in through the broken window. "Emma," he shouted, voice cracking. "Emma, where are you?" Then he heard a soft, trembling voice from the far corner. "Daddy, over here." He turned and froze. On the floor next to the couch, Emma was kneeling, her little arms wrapped around Shadow. The dog's fur was soaked part rain, part blood. His breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling in slow, uneven rhythm. Ethan ran to them, dropping to his knees. His hands shook as he touched his daughter's shoulder. "Sweetheart, are you hurt?" She shook her head weakly. "He saved me, Daddy. He didn't let the bad man hurt me." Tears blurred Ethan's vision. He brushed them away and leaned closer to the dog. "Shadow," he whispered. "Come on, boy. Stay with us." Shadow's eyes opened slowly. They were tired but calm, the kind of calm that broke your heart. His gaze found Emma first, then Ethan. He gave a faint sigh, his tail twitching once against the floor. Ethan ripped open the small first aid kit from his belt. His fingers slipped as he tried to clean the wound. The blood was everywhere, too much of it. "It's okay," he muttered, though he was speaking more to himself than to anyone else. "You're going to be okay, buddy. You're strong." Emma held Shadow's head gently in her lap, her small hands trembling. "He was so brave," she whispered. "He didn't even bark. He just fought." Ethan's throat tightened. He pressed the bandage against the worst wound, a deep cut across Shadow's shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. The dog winced, but didn't pull away. "Good boy," Ethan said softly. "Good boy." Minutes passed like hours. The room smelled of metal and rain. Outside, the wind had gone quiet, as if the whole world was holding its breath. "Daddy," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Is he going to die?" Ethan froze, his hands covered in red. He wanted to lie, to promise everything would be fine, but his voice broke before he could speak. "I don't know," he said finally. "But we're not giving up, not tonight." He tore another bandage, wrapping it tight around Shadow's chest. The dog's breathing came in short bursts, now his body trembling with every inhale. Emma leaned closer, whispering, "It's okay, Shadow. You don't have to be scared. You're safe now." Ethan looked at her, his blind little girl sitting in the middle of a storm-torn house, cradling the dog Boz that had nearly died for her. Somehow, even through the blood and fear, she looked peaceful. He swallowed hard. "You're her guardian, boy," he said quietly. "You always were." Shadow's eyes flickered as if he understood. His paw twitched, touching Emma's leg lightly. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, the soft hum of the storm moving away, and the faint ticking of the wall clock that had somehow survived. Then Shadow exhaled long and slow, a sound that seemed to carry everything he had left. Ethan pressed his hand gently to the dog's chest, feeling for a heartbeat. It was there, faint, fragile, but still there. "He's breathing," Ethan whispered. "He's still fighting." Emma smiled through her tears. "Because he loves us." Ethan nodded. His vision blurred again, but this time he didn't wipe it away. He let the tears fall, mixing with the rain still dripping from his hair. He leaned closer to Shadow's ear. "You did good, boy. You protected her. You did your job." Shadow's tail moved one last time, a small, tired motion, and his eyes closed slowly, resting against Emma's arm. The girl's hands tightened around him. "Daddy," she said softly, "he's warm." Ethan nodded. He knows he's home. They stayed there on the floor, father, daughter, and dog, the three of them bound together by something deeper than pain. Outside, the rain stopped completely. The clouds began to drift apart, and a faint silver light from the moon broke through, spilling across the broken glass and the quiet room. Ethan looked up at the ceiling, breathing hard. The sound of the rain dripping from the roof reminded him of heartbeats, steady, slow, alive. Emma leaned her head against Shadow's neck. "He's my hero," she whispered. Ethan smiled sadly. "Mine too." In that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: forgiveness. Not from the world, not even from anyone else, but from within. For all the guilt he'd carried for the accident, for the years of silence. Watching his daughter and the wounded dog who had saved her, he understood that love didn't erase the past, it gave it meaning. He placed his hand gently over both of them, his daughter's small fingers and the dog's still paw beneath his. No more words were needed. The house once filled with fear was now filled with quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm when everything broken is finally still. Outside, a faint breeze brushed the trees. The moonlight touched the wet ground, turning puddles into silver mirrors. Inside, 3 lives remained connected, one by blood, one by faith, and one by sacrifice. And in that fragile silence, Ethan realized something simple but eternal. Sometimes love doesn't speak. It breathes. Morning came soft and pale over Ridgefield. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that shimmered under the sun. The air smelled clean again, like the world had been washed of fear. Inside the small Ridgefield veterinary clinic, the hallway lights hummed quietly. Ethan Cole sat in a chair just outside the operating room, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. Through the glass window, he could see Dr. Jenna Mills, the town's veterinarian, moving quickly under the bright lights. Her gloved hands worked with quiet precision, guiding her team as they fought to save Shadow. On a bench nearby sat Emma, clutching a small pendant around her neck, a silver heart-shaped locket that Mrs. Nora Green had given her weeks ago. Etched on it were the words, "Love sees beyond sight." She rubbed her fingers over the words, her lips moving in a silent prayer. "Will he make it, Daddy?" she whispered. Ethan looked at her, her face pale, her eyes unfocused yet full of light. He swallowed hard. "Dr. Mills is doing everything she can," he said softly. "Shadow's strong, you know that." Emma nodded, holding the pendant close to her chest. "I told him to be brave. He always listens." The room was filled with the slow rhythm of the rain dripping from their coats, the quiet buzz of machines, and the faint echo of hope. Minutes turned into an hour, then another. Finally, the door to the operating room opened. Dr. Mills stepped out, her mask pulled down her eyes, tired, but smiling. "He made it," she said. "The surgery went well. He's resting now, but it'll take time. He's a fighter." Ethan stood up too fast, the chair scraping the floor. "He's alive," she nodded. "Alive and lucky to have you two." Emma let out a shaky laugh, pressing her hands together. "Thank you, Dr. Mills. You can see him in a few minutes," the doctor said gently. "He'll know your voice before he sees your face." Ethan sat back down, relief washing over him like another kind of rain, the kind that heals. He covered his face with both hands and breathed deeply. For the first time since last night, he allowed himself to cry. A few moments later, Dr. Mills led Emma into the recovery room. The soft beep of monitors filled the air. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint scent of wet fur. Shadow lay on a padded bed, bandaged and still. His breathing was slow but steady. A small IV line ran into his paw, and his fur had been cleaned where the wounds had been. "Hey, boy," Emma whispered as she approached. "It's me." Her fingers found his head by instinct. When her hand touched his fur, Shadow stirred just a small movement at first, then a soft sigh. His nose twitched and he turned his head weakly toward her. Then slowly he opened his eyes. "See," she said through tears. "I told you I'd come back." Shadow gave a faint whine and pressed his nose into her palm. Ethan stood at the doorway, watching, unable to speak. The image broke something inside him, the blind girl and the wounded dog Bao finding each other again through touch alone. Emma smiled through her tears. "Daddy," she said softly, "last night I saw colors in my head." Ethan frowned gently. "Colors," she nodded. "When he fought, I saw red like fire. And when he was beside me after, it turned gold. I think it was him. I think that's what love looks like when you can't see it." Ethan couldn't answer. His throat closed and his vision blurred. He stepped closer, kneeling beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he whispered. "You saw what I never could." She turned her face toward him, her small smile trembling. "It wasn't scary, Daddy. It was warm." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That's because he never left you. He never will." Shadow let out a quiet breath, his eyes closing again, but his body relaxed, safe at last. Dr. Mills peeked in, her voice soft. "He needs rest now, but he's going to make it." Ethan nodded, standing up slowly. He looked around the room, the light pouring through the window. His daughter sitting beside the dog, the quiet hum of life returning after the storm. Everything that mattered was right there. Emma kept her hand on Shadow's fur, whispering, "I love you, boy. You helped me see." Ethan smiled faintly, the words on her necklace glinting in the light. Love sees beyond sight. And in that small room with no thunder, no fear, and no more darkness, something brighter than the morning sun seemed to fill the space. It wasn't light you could see. It was light you could feel. Spring returned to Ridgefield with soft sunlight and streets lined with flowers. The snow had melted, and the scent of new grass filled the air. After months of quiet healing, the town finally felt alive again. Today was special, the annual Ridgefield Parade of Hope held to honor the heroes of the town. This year, the people weren't just celebrating police officers and firefighters. They were honoring courage in all its forms, even the silent kind. The main street was covered with flags and ribbons. Children waved small banners, and shop owners stood outside their doors, smiling. At the center of it all stood the stage where Mayor Leonard Hayes gave his speech. He looked out at the crowd, his voice steady but full of emotion. Today, he began, "We celebrate not only bravery in battle or danger, but courage in silence, the kind that comes from love, loyalty, and faith." The crowd listened quietly. Some held their breath as he continued. "A little girl who could not see showed us how to believe. A dog who could not speak showed us how to protect. And a father who once lost hope learned that miracles still walk among us." Applause rose like thunder, warm, joyful, and full of pride. Down below, Ethan Cole stood beside his daughter. Emma wore a light blue dress that fluttered in the breeze. Around her neck gleamed the silver pendant that read, "Love sees beyond sight." Beside her, Shadow walked proudly, his fur shining under the spring sun. A small scar on his shoulder was the only reminder of that terrible night. Emma held his leash gently, her fingers brushing the soft leather. "Ready, boy," she whispered. Shadow gave a low, happy bark, tail wagging. Ethan smiled, his heart full. "You both ready to show the world what hope looks like?" Emma nodded. "We already do, Daddy." As the parade began, the brass band started playing a slow, joyful tune. The rhythm echoed down the street, followed by cheers from every corner. When the announcer called their names, Officer Ethan Cole, his daughter Emma, and their K-9 hero Shadow, the crowd erupted in applause. Shadow lifted his head high, walking with calm pride beside Emma. Children reached out to wave, some even threw flower petals along the road. The sun caught his fur, turning it golden. Ethan walked beside them, his uniform pressed his eyes wet. He caught sight of Carl Dawson pushing through the crowd, clapping and grinning. "Well, if it isn't the town's newest legends," Carl shouted. Ethan laughed, shaking his old partner's hand. "Good to see you, Carl. Just wanted to say the case is closed. We found everything we needed at Danner's hideout. Looks like this town can finally sleep again." Ethan exhaled slowly, the words lifting a weight from his chest. "Then, we both got justice, didn't we?" Carl nodded. "Yeah, partner, we did." The parade continued past the town square. The smell of baked bread drifted from the bakery, and church bells chimed in the distance. As they turned the corner near St. Mary's Church, a familiar voice called out from the crowd. It was Mrs. Nora Green standing by the fence in her sun hat, waving both hands. "You look like angels," she cried, her face glowing with joy. Emma turned her head toward the voice, smiling wide. "I'm walking with one," she called back, patting Shadow's head. The people nearby heard her and began to cheer louder, some wiping their eyes. Nora pressed a hand to her heart. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "you're the light of this town." As they passed the church, bells rang again, brighter this time. The sun broke through a thin cloud, bathing the street in gold. Shadow trotted proudly, tail waving like a flag. Emma laughed, her hair catching the light, and Ethan couldn't stop smiling. For a moment, everything else, the pain, the storm, the fear, faded away. All that remained was the sound of music, laughter, and the rhythm of footsteps moving forward together. By the time they reached the end of the parade, petals covered the ground like snow. The crowd gathered around them, clapping and cheering. Ethan lifted his daughter into his arms, holding her high. Shadow stood beside them, watching the people with calm eyes. Emma lifted her pendant toward the sunlight. "It's shining, Daddy," she said softly. He smiled. "That's because love always does." And as the parade ended, the whole town of Ridgefield seemed to glow. Not from the sun alone, but from something brighter, something deeper. It was the light of faith, of forgiveness, and of love that truly saw beyond sight. A full year had passed since the night of the storm. Snow fell again over Ridgefield, soft and quiet this time. No thunder, no fear, only peace. The town glowed under a pale winter sky, every rooftop wearing a gentle layer of white. On the porch of their little house, Emma sat wrapped in a blanket, humming a tune. Her voice was light, warm, almost like the falling snow itself. Shadow lay at her feet, his head resting on her lap, eyes half closed in calm contentment. His fur had grown thick again, his scars nearly hidden beneath it. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and pine. Ethan Cole sat at the kitchen table with his journal open. The pages were filled with short, careful notes, pieces of thought, small moments he didn't want to lose. He wrote slowly, his handwriting neat but tired. "She can't see the light, but she has become it." He paused, reading the sentence twice, then smiled to himself. It was true. Emma's laughter, her courage, her love, all of it had become the light that led him out of the shadows he once lived in. And Shadow, the silent guardian, had taught him what faith really looked like. Steady, wordless, always there. He closed the notebook and stood up. The floor creaked softly under his boots as he walked to the door. Outside, Emma was still singing, her hand brushing the top of Shadow's head. Snowflakes landed on her hair and melted instantly. "Hey," Ethan said softly, stepping onto the porch. "You'll catch a cold if you stay out too long." Emma smiled, turning her face toward his voice. "I like the sound of snow," she said. "It's like the sky is whispering." He chuckled and sat beside her on the steps. "What's it saying today?" She tilted her head, listening for a moment. "It says we're okay." Ethan looked out over the yard. The snow fell slower now, flakes drifting like tiny feathers. The oak tree stood tall again, strong despite the winter. Everything that had once been broken was still here, not perfect, but whole. After a moment, Emma asked quietly, "Daddy, do you think Mom can see us now?" The question hung in the cold air. Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched the snow fall, each flake glowing faintly in the soft light from the porch lamp. Then he looked at his daughter, her calm face, her steady smile, the peace she carried without knowing. "I think she always could," he said finally. Emma smiled, her eyes wet but bright. "Then maybe she's happy." "I think she is," Ethan whispered. "Because we are." Shadow gave a small, soft bark, one single sound, almost like agreement. Emma laughed, leaning down to hug him. "See, Daddy, even Shadow knows." Ethan reached over and rested his hand on the dog's back. Shadow looked up at him, eyes full of quiet knowing. For a second, Ethan thought he could almost see Claire in that gaze. The same gentle strength, the same promise of love that never leaves. The three of them sat there in silence, watching the snow drift through the air. No sirens, no storms, no echoes of pain, only the stillness of life, moving forward. Ethan took a deep breath and felt the peace settle in his chest. The past no longer hurt. It had become part of them, like the roots of the tree that had weathered every winter. The light from the window spilled onto the porch, wrapping them in a soft golden glow. Three souls, a father, a child, and a dog, sitting together in the quiet snowfall. The darkness had finally gone to sleep, and love, patient and eternal, remained awake.